editor, producer of various videotapes, Coast to Coast AM, EarthFiles on the internet. You know all this stuff. She's been here every year but one, and that wasn't her fault. So please welcome back again, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thank you so much, because thanks to an angel in human clothing, we have got the electrons now talking between all of the machines, and for quite a while we thought that was not going to be possible. And the presentation that I would like to share with you today, I could not do talking to you. You have to see it, you have to hear it. And I'm wondering, is it slightly out of focus to all of you? And it may not be, Jerry and all, that we can't do anything about that. But we'll go forward being grateful that we have got visual and hopefully video and audio. And I really would like to start by embracing and thanking Lou Farish for doing this for 18 years. Stand up, Lou, wherever you are. There you are. I think that I've heard more this year than I ever had before about the sense that there is a kind of family community in the people who have made this trip to Eureka Springs now for almost 2 decades. And I was so impressed this morning by my friend Joe Lewell's presentation, and then Paul Von Ward's, and I was struck more than I think I ever have been in Eureka by something I've seen happen before, but this year it seems to be especially impressive, and that is that there's a synergy that happens between the people who come to speak quite often without our having had any detailed dialogue with each other before we got to the podium. And because I felt it especially today, because Joel literally took a phrase out of my mind, and he and I had not talked about it. And I'm working on a book that I hope before I pass to another dimension is done. And it has to do with, and why it is so difficult for me, because it is what I call, in my own mind, my own trip as a shamanic reporter. And the reason that in my own mind I have come to see this very strange journey that I've been on as an investigative reporter, I did not realize that back in 1979, when I was trying to get to the bottom of what was killing all of those animals in such strange ways, that I literally was walking through an Alice in Wonderland mirror, and I was trying to come back and report it. And as Joel and as Paul have so eloquently described today, the difficulty is that once you have gone through that looking glass mirror and you try to come back and report it, you run into all kinds of forces that want to basically erase you, destroy you, annihilate you. And that to continue going upstream against all of the acceptable paradigms and crack the mind and open up people's ability to even hear that there are the looking glass mirrors that everybody can walk through if they will do it, has been the challenge of my professional career as a TV producer and an investigative reporter. And I have not done this before, but I thought in the spirit of what happened today that I would share just 2 or 3 things that seemed to me to be a bridge from what Joel and Paul were talking about It's separate from where I'm headed about the possible crash and burial of a vehicle not from this planet. And the bridge is that everything that you all know so well, when you get into the phenomenon that has been variously called everything from UFO now to AB, which is not a bad advanced being as a catch-all, is always involving people who have either had interaction with non-humans or government people who have talked off the record, that we are not dealing with anything that is strictly three-dimensional as we know it. And in all of our lives as humans, I know certainly in mine, especially as a reporter, it is the events and the experiences that have happened to me with the unseen that have literally grounded me, maybe given me the strength to go up this strange path. And they are the things that have been the most important, but they are not what I feel comfortable talking about with most people, and have not my whole life. And so many things happened to me as a child that I never told my parents or my brother. And I'm only going to jump to 2 or 3 in this, what I think is, in a way, this is like a slight paradigm shift at Eureka, that it isn't just other dimensions. It has to do with the relationship between whatever we are, somebody else's hominid, vacuum cleaner, android creation, that perhaps there has been an effort by something to create what the Greeks called a hypostasis, a hypostatic experiment. It was always been used when the Greeks were trying to describe as above, so below, and how do you link? How do you take animals, evolving animals, and make them have the hearts of angels? Will it ever work? Has it already worked? And that there has been a conflict between forces that never wanted this hypostatic experiment to work at all. Is that what we have put into the demonic, the satanic, and the evil, an effort to keep us suppressed? And that the avatars of history, including the Jesus Christ figure, was trying to free us by making us aware, by pulling the rug out from under the controllers, that there was more to whatever this hypostatic experiment might be than any of the Hebrew patriarchs or any of the others were allowing anybody to know. And that's the context with which I would like to share with you just 2 or 3 things shortly. The first starts in my own mind in terms of this line of thought I would like to share with you. It was in January of 1987, and I was down in the Yucatan. And I had the good fortune of knowing a man who was Mayan, who wanted to take me out into the jungle to what they said was Tixia, and that's the way they pronounced it. And in Tixia, to get there, there were no signs, there were no maps. You had to know how to go down a dirt road that was only as wide as the Volkswagen we were in. And there were places in this hour going into the jungle where we would be coming down a hill and there would be water, and even the Mayan did not know how deep the water was. And we would stop the car and look at each other, and he'd say, "I think we can go through it." But we did not know if we would end up floating. And when we finally it was late afternoon. I remember a full moon was coming up that night. And they were preparing to do a ceremony, and there were flames on sticks. And he took me up. It was a sort of thatched roof, but it was also made sort of European style. And why I say this is because there was a blue door. And on the blue door, there was something that looked like a moon. And there were symbols I didn't understand. And the Mayan knocked. A woman came. They talked. And then we waited. And a man came to the door that you could feel the presence of him from feet away. And as he came, there was no language. Now no one is talking. He is the shaman for miles and miles and miles. And I'm standing having no idea what is going to happen. And as he shuffled toward us, without any introduction, he just reached out his index finger and he touched my forehead right here. And instantly, like a three-dimensional screen, was this cross. Now, he could never have known that the meaning of a cross to me in my life, something I've never talked about much with people. I often get questions, am I a Catholic? I was never raised in any church at all, but I wear a cross as my link to a blazing white cross that has appeared 3 times in my life when I should have been dead, and I'm still here. And the fact that that was the only gesture, and when the shaman touched my forehead, that this cross should appear, stunned me. And it linked me to these other events in my life in which something in the unseen that I feel is always just right there has the ability to be our ally, to be our strength, and it doesn't have to go through human intermediaries. And I tried to share this without any of this preamble in the book that I wrote, Glimpses of Other Realities, volumes 1 and 2, in the prologues. And I never agonized over anything so much in my life as writing the prologues to those 2 books, because I thought they were too personal, too private. I'm supposed to be an objective, hard-nosed reporter. But I put those prologues at the beginning of those 2 books because I feel that what we are experiencing today at Eureka, and what I have known my whole life, is that you can be as left-brained and scientific as you want to try to be. But there is something else that moves through us. Dylan said, the force that fuses through the green stem fuses through me. And that's where this energy, or whatever it is, I think is. And in that prologue, for those of you who read Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2, I wrote about the time in the Idaho mountains when something occurred, and it was as if the entire surface of everything around me was lifted, and everything was pulsing light. It was really quite an extraordinary event. It is what Joel was talking about this morning, that probably each one of us has a shamanic event that is an epiphany of some sort in our life, and it grounds us in a way that has absolutely nothing to do with books. And in that case, as the entire world is pulsing with this vibrant light, like in those crosses, it was a pressure on my own arms and hands that brought my hands up in front of me. It wasn't me. I had no volition, but it was like a pressure, and it pulled my hands up in front of me. I still remember that. Everything's pulsing around me. And now I'm looking at my own hands, and this thought voice that has been a very, very strong guide in my life since I was old enough to remember. It was recognizable as being that thought voice. It said, you are one with the light is one with you, and you are in the hands of God. And everything rheostated for about 5 or 10 seconds back to normal. And I have never been able to look at any person, animal, plant, or anything the same since that moment. In March of 1994, I was on a bus in Caracas, Venezuela, with a group of Catholics, with a friend who had gotten me down there to go see a stigmatist, Maria Esperanza, in Caracas, because she and her family were very privately interested in the phenomenon of everything, UFOs, animal mutilations, crop circles, everything. So the idea is that we were going to come together and share information. And I'm on a bus and there are many, many Catholics, and I'm sitting next to a Catholic priest with a white collar. And the entire conversation began with him asking me, was I Catholic? I said no. Why was I on this trip? I didn't tell him exactly. I just said I'd been invited. Well, what do you think of the catechisms as we do them on the bus? I said, I enjoy the rhythm of it very much. I said, I feel a real strong connection to what I think of as the force of life. And he looked at me very sternly, and he said, what do you mean? And I told him the story I just told you about what had happened in Idaho. And he said, now becoming the patriarch with an iron fist, you do not commune directly to God. And he did that on the bar. There was a bar on the seat. He did that. And I'm feeling this Catholic priest wants to hit me because I have violated something, and he's doing it to the seat. And I told him I didn't have any offense, didn't mean any offense, but that to me it was this force, this powerful force in everything that is life. And you can tell the difference by grasping a leaf that is alive and a leaf that's artificial, and everybody knows the difference. It's not quantifiable to me. Then the Catholic priest, when I resisted being pounded into, you must pray through Mary, you must pray through Christ, I said, that's not my experience. And I told him another that I had had, and he began to look at me with the strangest look in his face, and he began to have water in his eyes, and he said, with anger, I have been a priest for 33 years. Why have I never had one of these experiences, and you have told me two? I think the metaphor in all of this is every single one of you has probably had your own experience with the unseen that has left you with a profound link that you are probably often very, very, very afraid to bring up in a world in which there has been this effort, we'll call it a capital C, a control. Because the control is always focused on greed and power, and that must be a way to control thought. If you walk as a maverick, if you walk your own path, if you are independent of that which is around you, you will see and you will feel more. I think that's the way the universe is set up. And that whatever we have been dealing with in the lights, in the disks, in the triangles, in the boomerangs, in the cylinders, in the glowing beams, in the parting of the Red Sea, in the fires going back. One man in the government told me 20 years ago, Linda, this is a story that goes back 500 million years. We're convinced they made the dinosaurs. Whatever the intelligence or the intelligences are, I think that Joe Lewell and Paul Von Ward today laid out as exquisitely a box within which we can look at a history in which hominids, and now Homo sapien, just happened to be one of the latest weaves. And what we're all hungry for, I think, in a way, is to touch that force, to understand it all, and that what we have to break is the suppression. And this is why I honor all of you who come, and all of the conferences, because it is sad that this seems to be the only place that any of us can share any of these experiences without feeling like we are going to be stoned. Now, what I'm going to do with kind of like a bridge, I'm going to go into what is a story about possibly one of those aerial vehicles that may have been so large that it may actually have been buried by the United States government. And you will hear, in his own words, a United States Air Force pilot say that as recently as 1993, that's 13 years ago, that not only was it still there, but that he had been down in one of the underground tunnels that had been built from a location that is hiding in plain sight, to where this craft had laboratories come to it because they couldn't get it to laboratories. I bet a lot of you, when you were in school as a kid, had somebody come to you with a shell game. I still remember. It was a kid in my neighborhood. It was first or second grade, and he had 3 walnut shells. And he said, "Linda, I'm going to take this," and I think he had a pea or something, and he said, "I'm going to put it under one of these, and I know you're not going to be able to watch where it goes." And I thought that was the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. Of course I'm going to be able to, I'll watch. And as his hands moved, and I picked the shell, I was convinced that I had been able to track it. The shell was empty. And it was like a first primer lesson in my young school life that another human being, with just the flick of their hand and some experience, that close to me, in 3 shells, can create an illusion, and I can lose track of where that pea went. And the story I'm now going to unfold for you about a dry lake bed near Garrison, Utah, is, I think, very similar to that, a kind of shell game. The idea that the government of the United States is extremely skilled in being able to hide in plain sight is something that I have heard so many times from people who have worked in military and intelligence. That the ordinary becomes the camouflage. Something that looks like a deteriorating outhouse in a desert in Nevada or Utah might be the entrance to a very, very sophisticated underground installation. And then what we're going to start going through, some people would see as cracks of paint under a desert sun that might be an entrance to an underground office, a laboratory, or remains perhaps of a crashed and buried extraterrestrial vehicle. "52 years ago, on May 20th, 1953, it's been said by a variety of sources that some kind of unidentified aerial craft allegedly crashed in a desert site near Kingman, Arizona. Then, 3 weeks later, on June 11th, 1953, following the red arrow 200 miles north, here's Kingman, and you come up 200 miles, right here is where our story is going to be. Flat desert, very little there. But an agency of the United States government took this photograph you're looking at, and at least 24 others of this large triangular feature in this dry lake bed. And the triangle measured approximately 4,400 feet long and 2,700 feet wide. And those measurements are from a 1999 geologist analytical report. The location of this unusual triangle feature is 175 miles south of the highly classified Dugway Proving Ground. The nearest small town to the lake bed is Garrison, Utah. A few miles beyond is Baker, Nevada, where at least one local resident remembers a vivid explosion of something in the direction of the lake bed back around 1953, and we're going to hear more about that in a few minutes. Now here, for reference in size and placement, I'm standing inside of that odd triangular feature in the lake bed last July. It was about 101. It was the most, when people say, well, why don't people do more research? Well, I'm telling you, it's always difficult. And in this case, we were so hot that it was almost unbearable, but at least I got to walk and do some examination inside of this literal physical place. Now, 3 miles away, which is beneath, right here, this is the facility that we're going to end up looking at, and here is in the middle of that big triangle. Now, this site back there under that yellow arrow is known officially as the United States Forest Service's Desert Research Experimental Station, also known, and to everybody in the local area calls it the same thing, DRESS. Just like you were saying address, and you'll hear me say DRESS, but it's the acronym DRES. The Desert Experimental Research Range was established in 1933 by President Herbert Hoover, quote, as an agricultural range experiment station, and it covers 87 square miles. According to the U.S. government history about the site, rangelands during the severe drought years of the 1930s had deteriorated, affecting survival of livestock and ranchers. No one knew how to manage desert plants very well then, so the Desert Experimental Range was created to learn. In 1933, the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, built the DRESS facility where the yellow arrow is pointing, and this 135 miles of fence, part of which is shown here. A lot of this is original from 1933. They cut 40,000 wood posts by hand and built to fence off this gigantic desert experimental range. By 1935, the CCC built also these 2 stone obelisks as a gate entrance to DRESS. And 2.5 decades later, on October 26, 1976, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization formally dedicated the Desert Experimental Range as part of the International Network of Biosphere Reserves. This network of protected samples of the world's major ecosystem types is devoted to conservation of nature and scientific research in the service of man. It provides a standard which the effect of man's impact on his environment can be measured, reading from the official dedication. This biosphere designation for DRESS was ordered by the Director General of UNESCO on October 26, 1976, under this biosphere program. Exactly why this occurred and what the legal implications are in making DRESS a UN biosphere are still not clear. I've gone to lawyers trying to find out if there is some reason in this shell game of why this occurred, and I still don't have clarity. Today, in 2005, from the outside, the DRESS facility looks run down with paint peeling badly on all the buildings, but a strange juxtaposition to all the peeling paint and boarded up windows on several buildings are new padlocks and new doors. New door locks on new doors surrounded by peeling paint with brand new solid locks. The new doors and locks stand out as peculiar amid all the peeling paint and unkempt look of the buildings and the grounds. There is also fresh weather caulking around the doors, And I talked with the current U.S. Forest Service manager for that Utah region, and he said vandals periodically damage the Desert Research Station, and so he's had to replace doors and locks. But when I said, do you know anything about the impact of some kind of a vehicle in that lake bed, in 1953 or another year, he became very quiet and said, no, I do not know anything except current history. Now, from behind one of these decrepit-looking dress buildings, there is a new solar panel-powered monodirectional antenna that rises up. And a new addition, some distance from the dress buildings, is a series of solar panels surrounded by chain link fence topped by security barbed wire. The solar power from the solar panels is transferred on power poles to power lines that descend into what look like abandoned buildings backed by brand new heating fuel tanks. And this particular building with fresh white fuel tank looks like it's half above the ground and the rest is below. Behind one of the dress buildings are two large air ventilation shafts above what seems to be an underground room of cement walls against which are piled some flat boards. The two air shafts are very large. The underground space that the air shaft service is next to one of the dress buildings that has a basement. And in 1993, several curious UFO investigators, led by a now deceased man named Richard Miller, formerly with the United States Air Force and a colleague of a defense intelligence agent, opened up the white coal chute that you can see in the lower right, and they went down into this basement right there. In the basement, the investigators found 24 large, high-altitude aerial photographs of that triangular feature on the dry lake bed. And this is a July 20th, 1997. I'm jumping from 53 to 97. This is a United States Geological Survey Terra Server satellite image of the Dress Lake Bed Triangle. And again, the dimensions are really pretty huge. 4,400 feet long, 2,700 feet wide. And according to the geologist who did a study out there in 1999, this was, quote, not made by nature, according to Salt Lake City geologist Lamont Sorensen, who unfortunately died last year. Mr. Sorensen, through his company, LGS Geophysics, Inc., was hired in 1999 by UFO investigator Steve Jones to examine the aerial photographs of that peculiar triangle feature and to research the physical lakebed site with a magnetometer and ultrasound. Mr. Sorensen's report was titled, quote, Results of Geophysical Investigations, Vicinity of Desert Range Experimental Station, Baker, Millard County, Utah. Mr. Sorensen could not find any anomalies in the sections of the triangle that were searched for an underground anomaly that are indicated in this diagram at both the top and at the bottom. They did no research in the center, which is very ironic in face of what I'm going to share with you from remote viewer Joe McMonigal toward the end of this presentation. But the geologist told Steve Jones that the triangle pattern, so vivid from the air and yet so difficult to detect on the ground, was not the result of natural events such as flooding or meteor impacts. The implication is that an artificial digging process might have taken place and perhaps, as has been stated by the Air Force pilot you're going to hear from, to bury an object too large to transport. A logbook of visitors to the Dress site in 1980 to 83 was also found in the basement along with those aerial photographs of the triangle. People that you would not expect to be traveling all the way to that remote desert experimental range included Army personnel from Fort Carson, Colorado, Headquarters, U.S. Air Force Research and Development, the Naval Research Laboratory, Washington, D.C., and the United States Army Special Forces unit called USAIMA or USIMA, depending on who you talk to, from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. That acronym, USAIMA, stands for United States Army Institute for Military Assistance. An August 2003 article from the Electric Journal Special Warfare states, quote, "In June 1952, the United States Army activated a unique unit, the 10th Special Forces Group, at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The unit's primary mission, as defined by the Army, was, quote, to infiltrate by land, sea, or air deep into enemy-occupied territory and organize the resistance guerrilla potential to conduct special forces operations with emphasis on guerrilla warfare," unquote. USIMA's secondary missions included deep penetration raids, intelligence missions, counterinsurgency operations, and tactics of, and this is a quote, "unconventional warfare." Today, the 10th Special Forces train at the JFK Special Warfare Center and School in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Other entries in the 1980 to 1983 logbook that the investigators found by going down that coal chute included EG&G from Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada, highly involved in Groom Lake Area 51 operations, and an executive from Morton Thiokol, based in northern Utah, and that is the company that built the external tanks for the NASA space shuttle. A longtime California UFO researcher who became convinced under the sort of the guidance, you might say, of the Steve Miller, now deceased, convinced that the Dress facility was being used by the United States government to, quote, hide secrets in plain sight, unquote, is Steve Jones, who is now age 62. I photographed him on the steps of a Dress building this past July. And Steve is a computer systems trainer in Dixon, California, who earned 2 bachelor's degrees in 1974 from California State University in Sacramento. 1 degree was in anthropology and the other in psychology. In 1991, Steve talked with former U.S. Air Force Captain Richard Miller, who told Steve that he had been in the control tower at Scott Air Force Base near Belleville, Illinois, when Thomas Mantell tried to chase a large silver disc over Simpson County, Kentucky on January 7th, 1948. Probably most of you have read about the Mantell case, but if anybody hasn't, here's a quote from the pilot who was on a microphone with the tower, quote, "It appears to be a metallic object or possible reflections of sun from a metallic object, and it is of tremendous size. I'm still climbing. The object is above and ahead of me, moving at my speed or faster. I'm trying to close in for a better look. And just after 5 o'clock Central Time on a farm near Franklin, Kentucky, the remains of Mantell's F-51 were found scattered over half a mile. Mantell's shattered body was found inside the cockpit, and his watch had stopped at exactly 3:18 p.m. It is believed that he died from lack of oxygen at around 25,000 feet. The plane, though, continued to climb to 30,000 feet, and then it leveled out before going into a high-speed dive. Some of you may know that in the last 10 years or so, there have also been other reports that all over the metal of the Mantell plane were found thousands of dots, pockmarks, as if the entire plane had been exposed. Maybe microwaves, maybe some sort of retaliatory weapon that we have no knowledge about. Miller also told Steve Jones that he had received information from an intelligence source that there had been a UFO crash out in the Utah dry lake bed in the late spring of 1953, and that it was related to the Kingman, Arizona crash. And Miller talked about the Dress facility, which he thought was used for covert activity beyond its original agricultural mission. And there's another thing that he told Steve Jones. He said that in his work in the Air Force on the Mantell case, that he saw hard evidence that the plane did not crash, but looked like it had been dropped straight down to the ground, hard enough to break the frame. Was it dropped down? Was it forced down by the same energy that left the holes in the metal? Miller showed Steve the 24 high-altitude photographs like this one of the triangular pattern that Miller and a group of these investigators had taken from that basement. And the many photographs formed a grid around this triangle. In other words, there was a purposeful reason for taking 24 photographs from a high-altitude object, specifically of this very large triangular feature in this dry lake bed. What the aerial vehicle took the photographs from and which height is still not known. Miller also showed Steve the 1980 to 1983 logbooks with the entries by military intelligence and NASA personnel. And finally, provoked enough, in 1996, Steve Jones made his first research trip to the Dress facility. In the spring of 2005, Steve emailed me a summary of his discoveries and his hypothesis that something strange had crashed before the June 11, 1953 photographs in that dry lake bed 3 miles from the U.S. Forest Dress facility, and that the crash vehicle was so big that it could not be transported and was buried. And that's why I joined him and another researcher out there at the lake bed July 16th to 17th of last year, and I videotaped Steve talking about his work.
I think it's a safe house, and I'll tell you, it has every signs of being that.
Yeah.
It has all of the accoutrements. It has, I mean, those kinds of directional antennas don't just show up in the middle of a little U.S. Forest Service research station. You know, for God's sake.
So
that's actually the beginnings of a satellite uplink.
So
is what it is.
And the fact that 9/11, this place came alive.
This place came alive in 9/11. Within three or four days, we were here. We were down on the lake bed, and this place was lit up like a Christmas tree. It's like every single building the lights were on.
Steve Jones was surprised to find new solar panels, new doors, new locks, new antenna, big air vents, and other signs that the seemingly abandoned, deteriorating place is actually hiding something in plain sight.
What we're looking at here is a brand new solar panel array that has been installed on this facility out in the middle of nowhere. Just to give you an idea of cost on this, each one of these rectangles on these big panels here, they're roughly 18 by 48 inches. Those are probably $1,500 a piece. So, in other words, each one of these bigger panels is approximately $50,000. So, roughly, what you're looking at here is a little over $100,000 worth of solar panel array that is set up in the middle of this facility in the middle of nowhere. Why?
And all that solar power is going to all those unpainted buildings.
And that the aerial photographs were taken with this, the impact site over on this lake bed being the center of them. They took a grid pattern of aerial photographs on 11 June of 1953, about 50 to 75 miles in every direction, with this being the center, indicating to me that they had a very, very keen interest on what's going on in this particular area. And it just intrigued me. I thought, okay, there's got to be some connectedness between this place and that impact.
Steve, what do you think is the strongest evidence there may be an extraterrestrial vehicle out there in that dry lake?
Again, the size of the impact. And if you take a look at the not only the aerial photographs that were taken, and I really strongly believe that these were taken by the United States Air Force because of what they looked like. They were 24 inches by 24 inches, single shot aerial photographs on old photographic style paper, and they were not cut and pasted together. I've seen aerial photographs before as early as the early 60s. I know what they look like. I have personally seen the crash debris field of a B-52, which put down in Sacramento, California back in the 1980s. I know what an aircraft debris field looks like. This was not an aircraft. Whatever it was very large. What I suspected was that it was had a fairly kind of a shallow round undercarriage to it, and when it slid down this incline into the lake bed, it created havoc. I mean, it just really rained debris downfield in a massive way. And I've taken a look at the TerraServer images, which you can go on TerraServer to this day and take a look at this impact site. And it has not substantially changed in over 50 years.
Why is it triangular?
Why is it triangular? My feeling is that it was the shape of the craft that dictated the way that, and the angle of impact, with the way that it hit the lake bed, is what created that V-shaped pattern. And these were intelligence photographs, obviously from the way that they were made up. That really impressed me, and I thought, holy cow, I mean, why would they be making this kind of an effort to document and observe this particular area, which is out in the middle of nowhere? We are sitting in the middle of a valley that is probably one of the most desolate parts of the United States. This valley is 110 miles long, 20 miles wide, and there's only 2 ranches in this place. And it is, I mean, you'd have to go 50 miles to see another human being. And out in the middle of this little valley is this little village that we're sitting in, that was set up originally back in 1933, built as a CCC project, and it became a desert research experimental station. But yet, based on the logbook, we've got military intelligence people, for God's sakes, coming to this place. Why? I mean, that asks some very big questions. You know, talking to the locals around here, they know that something's going on out here. I've actually interviewed a person in a little town about 30 miles from here that said that he was awakened from a deep sleep when he was 12 years old, which would have placed it right around 53. The middle of the night, the sky lit up, the ground shook for 15 minutes, scared the heck out of his mother. She thought it was the end of the world. I mean, something happened out here.
In 1953, a boy named Bart Wright was about 12 years old, living with his large family of 12 siblings on the outskirts of Baker, Nevada. And Baker was and is a small town about 45 minutes by car from DRESS, the Desert Research Experimental Station. In 2001, Rex Leonard was manager of the Outlaw Bar in Baker, and he hired Bart Wright to be a bartender. Bart told Rex about a haunting memory that he had from back around 1953.
It was after dark, and this thing came flying across the valley and landed on the other side of the mountain, which would put it down there where Steve was looking at the crash site.
And did he describe to you anything about the color and what happened with his mother and stuff like that?
I think he said it had a blue, kind of a blue pervasive color, kind of like electric light, you know. I do remember him talking about it, that as a little kid, why he saw this thing. And the time, the dates, 53, I think, would coincide with the object that Steve is convinced fell or hit, crashed out there in that dry lake, which would be on the other side of the mountain from where Bart was living then. That he saw it in the eyes of a 10-year-old, and it was just this bright light, and when it hit, well, then the ground rumbled, and as you say, he probably did run to his mother. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it seems like he said that there were people from the government that came around to talk to people all over the valley after that.
One of the fourth-generation settlers in the town of Garrison, nearest Dress, is 90 years old Lad Davies. He told Rex Leonard that once long ago, while Lad was riding at sunup, that he saw, quote, a UFO not more than 100 yards away. It was making absolutely no sound, and when it went by, the color was black as if light was being sucked into it. Lad said that it was like you could look into infinity looking inside of infinity, unquote. Steve Jones wanted to know if he could find any evidence of a large buried object inside of that lake bed triangle. So in 1999, he and colleague Les Velez, who now is in California, hired Salt Lake City geologist Lamont Sorensen.
I have had field geologists, the guy that came with us out here that had the EG&G ultrasound testing, the guy was a petroleum geologist. He told me, he said, quote unquote, this is not a natural occurring feature. We showed him the aerial photographs. We took him out on site. He said this is not a naturally occurring feature.
What did the geologist say about the artificiality of the triangular pattern shape?
Well, he told me that it's not something that was made by the weather. It's not something that was made by... he's seen bolites. He's seen a bolite crater. I mean, those types of craters make a different pattern. It's just that it wasn't made by, like if they had a flash flood coming down the side of this valley over here coming out into the lake bed. It was not made that way. Like we started off with the ultrasound. We have used field magnetometers on it. We've actually gone out and punched holes in the ground just to see how far down we could go before we hit solid, hard pan or anything like that. It's a tough nut to crack. It really is. My guess is that the best way to do it would be thermal, infrared, and an overflight to do an infrared of the area to see if there's anything buried out there. That would actually show up. I mean, consider the logistics of the time, what they had to work with. If you've got a craft, for example, that is made out of a material like titanium, and they didn't have the plasma torches and that kind of technology to cut them up into pieces and haul them out. I mean, that's about the only option that they have, is to dig a big hole and leave it there.
Well, Steve, isn't the implication that if something so big came down over here in that dry lake bed near the Dress, that it had to be buried, they would have to bring in the scientists here. They would have to bring in the metallurgist and the chemist here because they couldn't take it anywhere else.
Correct. My feeling was that either they had to build a very large underground facility or have access to it in stealth to keep the local population from talking about it. And the logistics would be, they're doable. I mean, the craft is only, or the impact zone is only 3 miles away, and here you have a facility that's perfectly suited for doing something like that. I mean, the plant biologists that come out here don't come out here that often. All they'd have to do is shut off access for a little while, bring in a whole group of scientists. Even if they built a tunnel down there to get access to where they had buried it, logistically it would be beautiful because they could keep it secret. They could prevent. I mean, you know that the Soviets were keeping an eye on us just as much as we were them, and anything like this that would have set off alarms. And especially thinking the way the military does about this stuff, they would really have to keep it under wraps. And this is perfect. You've got a station that is set up as a research scientific station. You could bring in, engineers, biologists, and physicists and house them in this facility, and nobody would know the better. I mean, they wouldn't know.
And now I would like to share with you excerpts from a 2005 interview that I did by phone with a former United States Air Force pilot who has asked for anonymity, unfortunately. He says that he has firsthand knowledge from 1993 of an underground facility below the triangular pattern in the lake bed that was connected by a tunnel to the Dress buildings. He asserts that he also has firsthand knowledge of an oval-shaped extraterrestrial vehicle, not triangular-shaped, oval-shaped, that was 150 feet long and 30 feet high, and that crashed into the lake bed and was buried in early 1953 beneath the odd triangle ground pattern, which, as I understand, came after the crash. According to the retired Air Force pilot, the craft was still underground at the Dress Lake bed as recently as approximately 1993.
What I understand from Steve Jones is that you were on a recovery team.
Well, in the Air Force, which I'm not going to talk about, was all kinds of things. I can't talk about it. They will shoot me.
Were those things related to the extraterrestrial biological entity phenomenon?
You're making it hard. I can't talk about that stuff. They weren't from this world, let's put it that way.
Okay. And what is your personal first-hand knowledge about the dry lake bed triangle that is in the high-altitude photographs dated June 11th, 1953?
Well, that's a crash that happened back in late 52 or 53. I don't remember exact date now, but it crashed there, not in Kingman, and they buried it there.
And do you know for a fact that some sort of extraterrestrial vehicle was buried inside of that area that is the triangular pattern near the Dress facility?
Well, the ship was 150 feet in diameter. It was an oblong ship. It was about 3 stories high. Now, you can't pack that up on a car and drive it off. You can't helicopter it out. And the metal, you can't cut it up. So they got to put it somewhere.
And what is the source of your information? Can you?
That ought to tell you.
And what did our government do?
Start digging a big hole.
How did they do that?
With a lot of Army guys and shovels. I mean, they dug for days and days and days and days. It's pretty sandy out there, so it's pretty easy. Bulldozers and whatnot.
But burying something that's 3 stories high, that's at least 30 feet high, by 150 feet in diameter, that's pretty big.
Well, half of it was already buried when I finally settled down, so I had to dig the other half out.
It's still buried in October of 2005, as far as you know?
As far as I know, yeah. I haven't been there in probably a good 10 years or so, and it was there when I lived there last, so.
And is the Dress facility a hiding in plain sight intelligence operation in which there are underground facilities to access the buried craft?
Well, it used to be. It's not active anymore, but there used to be some underground walkways to the site and into the ship.
And you know that firsthand?
And I walked in the ship myself.
And do you know which type of entity it's linked with?
The Zeta Reticulum.
The gray skinned ones with the vertical pupiled reptilian eyes?
The small gray, yeah, I guess that's what you call them, yeah. They're not really reptilian eyes, but okay.
Well,
big round black eyes, but...
Do you have any understanding why the 1953 aerial that was taken on June 11th shows a large triangular unnatural pattern? Why a triangle?
Who knows? That those people did all kinds of weird things.
In other words, that the digging and the burying, leaving that triangular pattern, may have been for some reason.
There's probably some real reason for the other ships to come in and land, most likely, you might guess.
And what he's implying is that our government, with intent, would have used bulldozers and men and shovels to make this 4,400 foot long, 2,700 foot wide triangle to surround the center point where the craft was buried, and that the triangle was made to be a marker for whatever the intelligence was that came, and he said there was coming and going at this site for months after this by other beings in other craft. So the idea that we would have a triangle that was marking a buried craft is in a funny, strange way. Again, they're hiding everything in plain sight, with other explanations if anybody should ask, but nobody has asked until the last decade. Now, I talked to Ryan Wood, who suggested that I hire Joe McMoneagle of Artificial Intelligence in Virginia to remote view a sealed envelope that had only a Xerox of this June 11th, 1953 aerial photograph that you're looking at here, and the specific latitude and longitude coordinates of the triangle in the lake bed. And here is Joe McMoneagle's first remote viewing sketch, made on October 13th, 2005. He drew a triangle and indicated the pattern is in a desert location with the point headed toward mountains on the horizon, and that's true. And on the left are his first rapid initial impressions. Ground pattern, large, desert area, southwest, well-defined, triangular, even-sided on two edges, slightly smaller on a third edge. He also noted that the triangle is a large ground indentation, but the dimensions that Joe remote viewed were 60 meters or feet on a side, and there was some confusion about whether it was meters or feet, which is much smaller than the actual measured dimensions of 4,400 feet on a side and 2,700 feet, which is the actual reality. Now, why that size discrepancy? No one knows, but as I go forward with Joe McMoneagle's remote viewing report, there are also other size discrepancies between the estimate of the craft size that impacted in the lake bed and what the former United States Air Force pilot said that he knows. And one of the things to keep in mind, even though this is pure speculation, as I go through Joe McMoneagle's work, it occurred to me, when you're dealing with remote viewing, there might have been two events in that dry lake bed. There may have been one in the 30s of some other something, and then a second one much larger in the late 1952 to early 1953 period. And perhaps the discrepancies in the size and the timelines have to do with two events. Not known, it's just one of the speculations, and that there are contradictions as we go through the remote viewing details compared to what the pilot said. Now, in section 1, Joe McMoneagle's first target description that I just summarized, and in section 2, it is about how the huge triangle pattern in the lake bed was made, and Joe's notes are created by two large machines which cut approximately 1.5 feet of topsoil from the surface, removing it. The soil was removed to clean up what appears to be some kind of an impact site or what might be a vehicle crash site. Removal of toxic waste or material possibly being carried by a vehicle that impacted in the center of the area of the pattern. The pilot says it's the center, and McMoneagle remote views and says it was at the center. There was more soil removed from the center than from the edges. Original vehicle probably impacted at an angle. All traces of impacting vehicle were removed. Date of impact was approximately 1938 to 1940. Date of removal was approximately 1950. Those last three details from the remote viewer, who is a very talented remote viewer, do not match up to the known facts, or at least what the United States Air Force pilot and Richard Miller, their information was that it was late 1952, early 1953, that it was a large craft, and that we know the triangle itself that exists, we know those measurements. Again, the discrepancies might relate to the fact that a remote viewer might be picking up an overlay from something else that happened out there. We don't know. But I'm sharing this because I think it's very interesting when we are dealing with cases like this and we can't go to the government and say, please show us what's underground at the lake bed, and that we've gone to a remote viewer and that this is part of the research process. What were these machines that created the indentation and who made them? United States Army bulldozers manufactured by Ford Motor Company around 1930. Why did the United States government make high-altitude photos of this pattern on June 11, 1953? Camera testing. They were taking photos of sites with specifically known or understood characteristics in order to judge the camera capabilities against possible future or unknown sites. Was there or is there now anything buried underneath this indentation? Initially, there were hundreds of bits of debris buried on this site from the original vehicle impact trauma. However, these were removed when the site was carved down and scoured clean during the original site cleanup. The original airborne vehicle would have buried a considerable amount of its material due to its high rate of speed at the point of impact, especially due to its unique design. I do not believe there is anything currently left buried at this site. You say all traces of the vehicle were removed. Who removed them and where were they taken? I believe all material was removed from this site by the United States military prior to 1940. It's a timeline discrepancy. The debris was originally removed to an air base in the Southwest, probably a desert base in eastern California or western Nevada. This material has since been moved and further disseminated to a multitude of sites over the course of years. And then he attached a drawing of what he said the vehicle probably looked like just prior to impact from his remote viewing. Tubular, approximately 30 feet in diameter and about 70 feet in length. It was traveling in excess of 3,000 miles an hour. It was constructed of a material made from a metallic alloy consisting of aluminum oxide, nearly 100% pure, with some titanium and an element something like nickel and copper mixed, but with a couple of extra molecules. There were no onboard life forms. The drive system was a form of electronic pulsed heat waveforms through some kind of tunnel system. It was rapidly spinning, but not out of control. It was designed to self-destruct after entering the atmosphere and following the completion of its mission. Its mission was and is unknown. For those of you who have read my very first book that came out in 1989, An Alien Harvest, in that book I speculated, based on conversations with military people, that many of the crashed discs were in fact possibly like Trojan horses, that they had been designed to crash, that they had been designed to place certain kinds of technology in the hands of humans, that whatever was ever found as life forms with or on or around those discs were in fact androids. They were not the intelligence that made the discs or the androids. And that the idea that we would be dealing with an intelligence that would place gifts or crash technologies is in one sense peculiar, but seems in some other way consistent with the idea that we were in fact in an attack retaliation mode with an intelligence that might actually have a mission to try to place certain technologies in the hands of certain human groups on the planet. And I will never forget talking to one scientist several years ago who told me, about his back engineering of extraterrestrial technology, exactly as Lieutenant Philip J. Corso had described in The Day After Roswell. And the man said the most curious thing. He said, after a while, we became very aware that the technology in some of these craft were taking us down dead ends. Drawing 2 shows the point of impact, which was angular, approximately 40 to 50 degrees to the desert floor. I believe the desert was selected at the targeted impact area to prevent or lessen the probability of additional collateral damage to possible local life forms, whether they were human or animal. This is Joe McMonigal speaking. Drawing 3 depicts the resulting debris field which resulted from the impact. Basically, there was little, if anything, left of the vehicle larger than a grapefruit. Material that was left was pretty much fused with the desert sands or obliterated beyond recognition. And drawing 4 shows the area after the reclamation and cleanup by Discovery crews. Debris was removed by the United States military, and this debris is now pretty much scattered to a multitude of locations across the United States. Aside from its metallurgical uniqueness, there is very little value to the debris recovered from this crash site. Because of the unique nature of this remote viewing, I am not sure future viewing will prove valuable on this target. Well, now, since the fall, a few months ago, 3 times I and some others have tried to organize with a pilot who has access to some deep ground penetrating radar to fly over that site, and I had really hoped that we would have data that I would be able to report to you in Eureka Springs. But for reasons that are not clear, all 3 of those missions have been aborted for all sorts of, I'm going to say, technical reasons. And we're trying, and I do not know whether we are going to ever be able to confirm that there is something in the center. That triangle is still there. You can go onto Google and you can still find the triangle today is not as clearly defined as it is in the 1953 satellites, but it's definitely still there. And the pilot, even though he didn't want to go into details, he left me with the impression that it was there when he was last there in '93, but that it, by then, it may have been, and that's the part that haunts me, is if they couldn't move it through all those decades, what would have happened to it if it's not there? If we don't find anything, then where did it go? What did happen? So this is the mystery of the DRESS facility in the dry lake bed 3 miles away that has this gigantic triangle that has been there since the June 11th, 1953 high-altitude photographs were taken. I have also been working with somebody in the National Archives trying to see if we could find any kind of a high-altitude photograph that would be before June 11th, 1953, that would show this exact site without the triangle. I would very much like to see if that exists, but so far it's very difficult. If anybody has ever tried to do specific latitude, longitudinal land comparisons by going to the National Archives, I can tell you it is really, really, really difficult. I've done some myself and working with somebody we're trying. The value, I guess, of sharing this story and others is that as much as our government has had a policy not only of denial since the Truman administration or the Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration, what I see today as an investigative reporter and television producer is a policy of erasure. Total and complete erasure. If they can get through one more generation without any of this having to come forth as some kind of official truth, if they go one more generation, then all of those of us who have either been exposed firsthand or were in World War II or Majestic 12 or whatever will be dead, and there will be no baton passing because the policy of erasure is so effective that it is actually like Alice in Wonderland, 1984. Lie is truth. Truth is the lie. And if there's nobody and no way to counteract it, then the policy of erasure about our religions, about our evolution, about what we are, where we came from, about what these discs are, what's in them, what do they want, these multiple intelligences, which I think we had a perfect insight into in Joel Lewell's and Paul Vaudenward's presentations earlier today. I think that is the truth. And I think that the policy of erasure is one in which government or governments have decided it is just so much easier to just keep going with all of the lies, because then the stock market doesn't crash. People don't panic. Everything stays nice and easy and controllable. But underneath the policy of erasure, 5,000, 10,000, 40,000 years of a control by a small group of humans over everybody else as the planet evolved, done apparently with the sanction of many of the advanced beings, because it served their purposes for the hominids and the evolving what we now are Homo sapien. There's been a bunch of models. It served the purposes of the advanced beings for us not to fully understand what was going on, or they tried to have a symbiotic relationship on this planet, and something didn't work, coming back full circle to where I started. That there may be something about a hypostatic experiment, that maybe there were creatures who wanted animals to just mine gold, as Zecharia Sitchin has written about for 3 decades. And that something else, and we'll just call it the huge fabric of the cosmos, decided that if there were beings that were advanced enough to manipulate DNA in already evolving life forms and create whatever life forms served their purposes, whether they were unicorns, centaurs, dragons, dinosaurs, or hominids, that force would maybe pull the rug out from under experimentation that was flying in the face of maybe the universe has some rules about what is allowable to do with life. And maybe today, in 2006, as we are coming up against this strange ticking clock out there of 2012, maybe there are cycles. Maybe all of those carved spirals and all of those stones all over Europe and Africa and all over the world have to do with when primal hominids lived in a more somnambulistic relationship with whatever this major force is that can also be used to manipulate lower forces. But they were left, all hominids have been left with a sense of primal cycles, that there is a beginning and a middle and an end. And that 2012 is the end, at least, of one of the carved cycles. Is it something to be afraid of? I don't think so. And I say that with this sense. If there is an astronomical event that is coming upon this earth, as many abductees have said, that is going to completely destroy and fire surface life, and the only ones that will escape will be those that already are on Mars, that are already on the moon, that have underground installations deep enough to not be affected by fire or whatever the astronomical event is. In the big scheme of things, in the big carved spirals, it really doesn't matter, does it? Because like Joe Louell and Paul Von Ward, I think that that cycling also applies to whatever it is in each one of us that is that spark of life. I think that there is a recycling in all, and that maybe we stand finally, at a point where something is watching. Are they going to get down their knees again? Whether it's in front of humans or something that glows and they call a God and say, yes, you can rule my planet. You can run my life. You can manipulate my dreams. You can tell me when I'm going to be born, what I will do, and when I will die. If this planet takes that path, then, to me, the transition at the moment of death would be preferable if on the other side there was freedom. Thanks.